Karl, welcome to the ProFit podcast. How are you doing, mate?
Thanks, Matt. Good to be on and looking forward to the conversation.
And we've just done a very brief introduction in sort of the preamble before you came on. But for the listeners, please tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, who you work with, what sort of your scope of practice is. We'd love to know.
Yeah, I've been very, very lucky, Matt. Really, I've managed to avoid working for the past 30 years. So I've been fortunate enough to. My original background was as a golf professional, a teaching professional. In my own playing days, I was spectacularly unsuccessful as a player, despite having what many people talked about, having potential and ability and all the rest of it. I could never really transfer that into performance situations. And I was finding with my own coaching that I was seeing lots and lots of players who were doing quite well in practice and on the range, things like that. But again, not transferring onto the golf course or tournament. So I just became really interested in performance and what was getting in the way of human beings being a closer version of their true capabilities. So I left golf for a while. I went and studied various things, various approaches, NLP and CBT, hypnosis, sort of inner game, lots of different things. And I came back to golf a few years later and started working with a few players, more on the performance element of things. I got lucky with a couple of players that did well in the early days, and then that led to working with the likes of Darren Clark and Lee Westwood and Graham McDowell, who did okay, and Louis Oosthuizen, who won the Open, and then that sort of mushroomed into working in a few other sports like cricket. Worked with Michael Vaughan during the Ashes series in 2005 for the famous series against Australia. Some Premiership football players, but essentially it's working in the performance arena of taking somebody who feels they're a little bit stuck with what they're doing and seeing if they can get a little bit closer to what they believe they can truly achieve.
We could do with him at United at the minute, then, Paul, couldn't we?
Certainly could.
That's probably a bigger project. That's probably bigger. As a United fan, it's a project I would love, but it's probably far too much bigger project to my capabilities, I would have thought.
I think we need a team in there at the minute to turn that one around. So in terms of our audience and our listeners, a lot of them are personal trainers, a lot of them are newish personal trainers as well. We do have a lot more experienced listeners as well, but I'd say the bulk of them are new personal trainers working with their clients, working on themselves as well. So I think it'd be great to get your insights on today's episode around how you get the best out of people, how you get that performance out of people, and what some of the blockers are. So I guess one of the first questions I wanted to ask you was, how do you work with people? What's the format? What does it look like when you work with clients?
Yeah, the first thing I always try and do, Paul, is to get a really clear picture of that person in front of me, because it's a cliche to say it, but everybody is different. Everybody's got their own unique drivers, their own unique blocks that are getting in the way. So, for instance, with a golfer, the most important thing I do is take them out onto the golf course, and I really say very little. I'll walk 6 or 8 holes and just ask them lots of questions, but I don't throw lots of suggestions at them till I feel as if I've got a clear picture of how do they react to poor shots, how do they react to certain situations. And that would be, I know it's never easy in a lot of situations, but I think that's what a really good personal trainer does, that they really get to know that individual. And they don't just give them a formula, they don't just give them a program, they really connect and understand what it is that's really important to that person. And I think, in the modern world, people really, really respond to that, because, we tend to be shunted here, there and everywhere, don't we? Unfortunately, we go to the doctor, and due to the constraints, they've only got a few minutes and you're in and out. And I think a lot of people feel as though they're not really understood. So I think, that would be my number one thing is find out as much information about. I say to a lot of people, get them to understand that your life, basically, we're all just a collection of stories. That we're a bunch of stories that we bring to any situation. And what is a story? It's a kind of narrative in your head, the way that you describe the world, the way that you describe the place in that world. And it's very important to get people to see how their story is panned out to this point, because there'll be patterns that keep repeating, there'll be things that keep showing up over and over again. And I often say to people, if you don't clearly understand your current story, it's very, very unlikely that you're going to be able to change your future story. So that's one of the things I get many players to do, is to write out what the story has been up to this point. And then let's start to look at what would you want the story to be in the future? How would you like to construct your future going forward? And then this might be a ridiculous oversimplification, but I've after 30 odd years at this, I've got nothing better in a sense than, or nothing more powerful, the understanding of what I call the accumulation of good days. That is, if you're going to be good at anything, whether that's getting better at your fitness, whether it's building a business, whether it's improving your golf or your football, your tennis or whatever, it really is about being able to accumulate as many good days as possible. And that might sound obvious and simple, but very, very few people are really aware of what constitutes a good day. How do you start a good day? How do you keep a good day going? And how, probably more importantly, do you finish that good day? So, you know, that is such a key element that in the work they do is to get people to understand. And then all of a sudden, what you tend to find is that as the days accumulate, success kind of like grabs you by surprise. You look back and you go, wow, I am feeling fitter and stronger. I am making more birdies on the golf course. I am winning more tennis matches. But it's as a result of being absorbed in the days rather than the outcome at some point in the future.
Yes, I love that point about story work that you do with them. Because that's something, I actually have 2 adopted sons, and that's something that the work that therapists and people at the team around those children, including ourselves, the parents, we do a lot of that with them. Story work, looking at what's the story up until now and what's the story you want to create. Yeah. So how do you do that with the clients that you have? Because I know how I do it with kids, but is it the same sort of thing, or is it?
There's something very, very powerful, Paul, about actually writing down your story. You can have your story in your head. I know it's probably slightly different for younger kids, but you know, you can have your story in your head, but it's largely it's a script that you're following that you're unconscious to. You're just blindly following this storyline. And when you actually get people to write down a really detailed description. So if again, I keep coming back to golf, but you can apply it to anything. If you take a golfer and you get them to write out their golfing story, and then they go back and they see who were the key influencers, what are the conversations that they've had that have made a difference, both negative and positive, what are the key events that have had an impact on them, again, negative and positive. When they actually get that clear description of the story written out, they can actually start to see how they've interpreted some of the things that have happened in their life. And as a result of those interpretations, that is the way that their behavior tends to be driven. And when you actually can see the story in a document, you realize that you've actually just made it all up. The events may have happened, of course, and there might be some really terrible events that have happened. I'm not dismissing that.
Yeah.
But it's your interpretation of the events that it's the critical factor. You know, you can get one person who, let's take unemployment, for instance, one person who loses a job and gets crushed by it and they take a long time to recover. Another person, they'll say it's the best thing that ever happened to them because it mobilized a spirit of entrepreneurship or whatever, and they took off as a result of that. So it really is getting somebody to see that the events come along for all of us, good, bad, and indifferent. But it's the interpretation of those events that's the crucial element, and to then get them to understand interpretation is a choice. You do have a choice of how you interpret what's happened to you, and then that choice of interpretation can make a powerful impact going forward. And linking into what I've just said, if you then create a story of the future that you want, okay, you can put all that nice stuff in there, all the goal setting, all the standard things that people would do. But then it comes back to, within that new story, how are you going to be on a daily basis? how are you going to be that's different than the old story? And if the old story is that the alarm goes off and you feel really comfortable in bed and you say, I'll go to the gym tomorrow, well, that story is going to probably keep panning out unless you actually write down how your responses are going to be different to the challenges that come along to actually construct the new story in the future. So I think, you know, it's so relevant, I would have thought, to personal training, isn't it? And helping people get fitter and stronger. That this, it's, you know, I don't want to dismiss information, but we know a lot of good information, be that in personal training, be that in football, cricket, or golf, or whatever. It's the actual implementation of that information that's the critical factor. We're kind of like drowning in information, I think, if we're not careful. That people are constantly getting, you know, new ideas and theories off YouTube, but it's actually turning that information into behavior. And I think that's where a really good coach or a really good personal trainer creates accountability, and it's a partnership then between a client, between a player and the coach, to actually build into that future where behavior starts to change. Because as you guys know, you can have all the best theories, all the best knowledge, but not a single thing will change in your life until your behavior changes.
Yeah. And when you talk about writing that future story then, Karl, is that then what you're using as the benchmark for deciding how many good days you've accumulated? Are the good days the ones that are in alignment, presumably, with what you've written as that future story? That's how you're measuring that, essentially.
Absolutely, yeah. So you'd build a picture of what you want the future to look like, and ask yourself, what would a good day look like to contribute to that? And I'm a big believer in, you know, if you think about it, what's the best way to have a good day? Well, it's probably a really good idea to start the day well. I would say, for everybody listening, if you really drill down and really looked at the first hour of your day, what it is that you do in that first hour, that will pretty much determine your life, I believe. The way that you are in the first hour of the day. If you get off to a bad start, it's a real catch-up process, and it's tough to have a good day. If you get the day off to a good start, it's a bit like being 2-0 up at half time is a lot better than being 2-0. Man, maybe in Man City's case, it's not the case, but you know, if you get off to a bad start, it's harder to fix it. Get off to a good start, you've much more of a chance. And then I think it's really important to reflect as well. So you get to the end of the day and you look back on the day, and did I do what I said I was going to do? And if you have, I think there's a real sense of satisfaction that you said you were going to do X, Y, Z, and you went and did it. And I think when you reflect at the end of the day, and you get good feelings as a result of doing what you said, you're then you're wiring into your brain a sense of pleasure of achievement. Now, human beings will do pretty much straightforward. We're straightforward in many ways. We'll do more of what makes us happy, and we'll avoid what makes us sad. So if you actually find a way of starting the day well and then reviewing the day well, you're much more likely to be able to create those behaviors that are constructed towards that future that you've decided that you want.
Definitely. That's something we've spoken about in the past, of protecting your first hour and your last hour of the day in your routines. We've advocated that in the past. Are there certain things you get people to do at the beginning and the end of the day to kind of get a good start and a good finish? Are there things that you not push on the client but recommend, I guess, or do you let the client construct that themselves? How do you do that?
I mean, you give them some suggestions. I mean, I think a great one. I mean, you guys are better fixed than me to sort of comment on this, but I think, you know, something physical to begin the day is a great way to take you away from thinking to doing. You know, we lie there in bed, and the mind runs riot about how cold it is outside in the winter time and how tired we are and we deserve a lie in and all that kind of stuff. But a physical act, something, for instance, where, you know, at the back beside your bed, you have maybe, you know, a bottle of water or whatever, and your first act of the day is to put your feet out of bed, get hold of the bottle of water, and the bottle of water is the signal to actually get out of bed. And as you get out of bed and you drink a certain amount of water, that physical act is then got you underway in terms of movement. But there's another thing that you can do whereby you can actually understand that it's much easier to link a habit that you want with a habit that's already there that you don't need to think about.
Right.
So So for instance, let's say you believe that writing down in a journal the things that you're going to do today are going to be beneficial, which they generally are. To get people to do a journal every day is really difficult. But if you say to them, well, what do you do every morning? Do you have breakfast every morning? Yeah, I have porridge every morning or whatever. I have a cup of tea every morning or coffee, whatever it may be. If you say to them, okay, well, make sure that your journal is next to the kettle, so that when you actually go and make that brew in the morning, the first thing that you do without even thinking about it, you're taking that existing behavior that you don't need to think about, and you're linking it with a desired behavior. So the journal is at the side of the kettle. So you put the kettle on and there's the journal, and you're much more likely to write in it. So you can take that principle and apply it to so many things. That think about things that you've got that are already existing in your life that literally take no conscious effort because they're wired in, linking that with a behavior that you desire. From a mental game perspective, if somebody believes that mindfulness is a good idea, which I think it is, being mindful and present to what it is that you do, again, that can be challenging to get people to do it formally. But you say, okay, every day that you brush your teeth, okay, right, I brush my teeth. Could you brush your teeth mindfully? Could you be really present to the actual experience of brushing your teeth first in the morning? So you're actually practicing mindfulness without a formal sitting down cross-legged and having to put the joysticks on and all the rest of it. You're actually doing something that is second nature to you, but you're linking something else to it. It's a really, really powerful concept, that, and it's so powerful, in the gym and in sporting environments, to take what is already there that you do not need to think about and then link it to something that you do want to do.
Yeah. I was actually listening to the Off Scratch guys on your Brain Booster podcast today.
Right. Yeah.
I heard Natalie talk about kettle exercises. I thought, that's a great way to think. It was the same thing, wasn't it? Like linking it.
I thought that was a great description. Yeah. People who say they haven't got any time. Well, okay. Well, how many drinks do you have a day? Well, I have 5 cups of tea a day. Okay. Well, that's five moments in your day where you could do some lunges or some squats or some plank or whatever it may be.
2 minutes there. Yeah. And we had a Casey Zavaleta, who's a habits coach, on recently, and she talked a lot about the power of 2-minute little small things that were just positive votes in the right direction to get those behaviors to start to roll. Yeah. And, it doesn't need to take hours and hours. It can be, like you said, brushing your teeth, being mindful while you're brushing your teeth. And that's as much as it needs to be.
It's amazing, really, Paul, when you think about it, that if you go back, 50, 60, 70 years ago, that the information that human beings had available to them was minuscule compared to what we have now. But I think if you go back to a lot of those times, probably as a generalization, people were working in more sort of manual industries, using the bodies more, and the days in many ways would have been probably more challenging in a lot of ways. But the establishment of habits and patterns were kind of ingrained, because the days were not just constantly being bombarded by what I think is a lot of the time superfluous information. The phones and the internet is great, but how much of our actual world is being drowned in just stuff that's coming into our brain. So our brain is being overloaded at the expense of establishing good patterns and habits from a physical perspective. So, I think that's hopefully one of the benefits of podcasts, is that you can be doing things with a podcast. A podcast can be actually a good trigger to go for a walk, can't it? That it's on your phone and you can actually do some activity with a podcast. I think a video is a little bit more challenging in the sense that you've got to sit and watch the thing, but podcasts are, I think, are a great medium of linking receiving good information, but actually with physical movement as well.
Yeah, definitely. It is such a challenge now, that information overload. I mean, I even thought the other day, I was talking to my wife about moving the phone out of the bedroom at night, because I'm just noticing bad habits starting to creep in on a morning, and looking at kind of what physical hack can I do to get the phone away from me first thing, just so I don't check it. Is it? Are you seeing more and more of that in terms of working with the clients you work with? Is that a harder pattern to break?
100%, Paul. Yeah, it's. I would say you know, if you look at sport, what does sport demand of you? Whether it's football, whether it's snooker, tennis, whatever it may be, sport demands that you pay attention to what is going on right now. Whether it's a pass that you're about to receive, whether it's a shot you're about to play in golf, or it's a pot in snooker, that sport demands that you be present to the task in front of you.
Yeah.
Now, if you spend all of your life anything but present because you're on your phone all the time at this low level of distraction, constantly flitting from one thing to another, I don't think it's any coincidence then why, you know, a lot of people find it challenging to stay with what they're doing when they play sport, and they find themselves being distracted because they've been practicing being distracted most of the day. So I think I'm seeing it so much more now that you know, that I mean, I hate seeing young players practice golf with the headphones on, you know, because they're practicing and they're maybe listening to music, but the music is actually stopping them being distracted. They're not having to listen to the thoughts in their head. They've actually got something that's kind of holding their attention there. But then when they come and play the sport and they can't use the headphones, and I think, well, all of that practice has actually been wasted because, you know, you've been practicing in an unnatural way because the music's been distracting you when you've been practicing, but you've not got that in the actual tournament environment. So, you know, I think the whole thing of you know, overload and excess stimulus is a really, really important area to look at. And again, relating it to the gym, I think the gym is a great opportunity to be present to your experience. You know, to be present to the feelings in your body. And again, I think, you know, I'm not probably sound like a Luddite here, sort of anti-technology phobe, but you know, I think, you know, again, how many people are in a gym, and you know, it's something one of my pet hates when I see it in the gym. You know, somebody's on a treadmill and they're reading the paper and stuff like that, and I just think, no, you know, you should be present to your actual experience. You should be present to what your body's telling you, tuned into what your body's telling you. You know, with a lot of the golfers, I'll get them to every day go out for a walk or a run, and it's called walking meditation. And you know, it's something that I try and do every day, is that you go for a walk and just see, when you go for a walk, how good you are at paying attention to something that's going on in your body right now, and can you keep your attention there? So that simple feeling of your feet as you're walking along, can you pay attention to that and actually hold your mind there? And what sounds the simplest thing in the world, for anybody trying it, you'll do it and you'll take a few steps, and then your mind, it's off. It's thinking about what you should have done yesterday and what you need to do tomorrow. But every time that you bring it back, every time you bring your attention back to the feeling of your feet as you're walking, you're training your attentional skills. You're training yourself to be more present. And actually, that's where I fundamentally believe that's where humans are at the happiest. You know, when you're really absorbed in a book, or you're really absorbed in a conversation or a film, you're actually present to your experience. You're not off in the past or out into the future. So it's using what can seemingly seem really simple things like walking and training in the gym. And I'll say to all the players, the gym is not only a place to train your body, but it's a wonderful opportunity to train your mind.
Yeah.
You know, because you know, I'm sure you guys have seen Pumping Iron, you know, with Arnold, and you know, and Schwarzenegger talked about the mind. He was literally in his muscles with his mind, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a classic. Anybody not watched it, make sure you do.
Yeah. 6 weeks, I'll be ready.
Oh, right. So that word attention is really important, isn't it? I've heard you mention it 5 or 6 times there, but I hadn't thought until you were talking about it there of how important it actually is. Whether somebody's on their, I wouldn't even mind if someone spends time on their phone, put attention into that rather than doing 5 or 6 things at once. But whatever it is you're doing has to have attention, has to have your attention, and that gives it, I guess that gives it intention as well. Like, you know what you're doing and why you're doing it, as opposed to just having 4 or 5 things on the go that I guess your attention isn't really on at all.
it's the word attention, Paul, is only everything.
Yeah.
You know, it literally is everything. It's your attention will determine your experience of life. Your attention will determine your success in life. It'll determine that your happiness, you know, what you decide to pay attention to. And this idea of multitasking, the brain is not designed. We are terrible multitaskers. The brain is not designed to multitask.
Men and women, yes, not just everybody.
Yeah, it's the biggest myth ever. I think that, you know, men, women, getting some dangerous territory what I might be saying here, but you know, I think human beings were not designed to actually multitask. We're designed, the brain works best when you might have a lot of things to do, but if you're going to do this email, be with this email, get that email finished, and then pick the phone up and have a conversation with somebody. But you know, we see it's, you know, we've all experienced that. You can tell when somebody's having a conversation with you and they're just not there. They're literally just not there, are they? They're actually just, you know, that they're already thinking something else. They're way off in a different place. And you know, it's just even asking yourself that question, what is my attention on, is a great way of kind of getting better at it and bringing yourself back. And if you're having a meal, pay attention to it. I mean, how often do we see that people sit down, they don't pay attention to the food? It's just a something that they've got to do to get out of the way, to get onto the next part of the day. So they're always somewhere else. And you know, I think, you know, brighter people than me and more people who are more expert in this would reconfirm the benefit from a health perspective of being mindful when you are eating. I think the benefits of that are just not just for the mind, for the whole physicality.
Definitely. We see it all the time when people start to do things like even just pay any attention to what they're eating, tracking their calories, if that's their system, or taking pictures of the food that they eat. Or once they start to pay attention to it and actually look at it, they're kind of shocked by what they're putting in their mouths. That's the first reaction we generally see when you give someone a nutrition plan. It's quite interesting to watch, because up until that point, they just don't think they were aware.
You know, what's the opposite of mindful? It's mindless, isn't it? And I think, you know, we're all guilty of mindless behavior, but that ties back to the story as well, that we're just operating a script that we go through in our life, and we go on autopilot with things like food. And as you say, it becomes quite dramatic for a lot of people to actually be aware of what their actual habits are and what the patterns are. It's very difficult to change anything unless you're really clear of where you are. You know, it's an obvious thing to say, but you know, a sat nav can only work when it knows where its starting point is. It can find anything, but it can only find anything once it knows exactly where it is to begin with. Yeah.
You've got some really nice, clear little models there that I'm going to pinch. A sat nav only works when you know where you are.
Many people would call them cliches, Paul, but thanks for the.
Paul's just rebranded them for you. I'm interested to know, Karl. So if we look at this idea of like rewriting your story and then using that to create these good days and then accumulating those good days, assuming that, you know, we're working with humans and at some point those good days aren't always going to be there. There might be a few bad days in a row, or not so good days. You know, I'm just thinking from a coach's perspective. You know, what suppose there's two things. What do you usually see getting in the way of people? Like, I don't think people intend to have bad days. You know, what tends to be the things that maybe throws them off? And then how are you generally approaching that with people? How are you going at that when you're helping them?
I think one of the big things that gets in the way of us all is feelings, is emotions. You know, that we get certain sensations in our body that can create thoughts. Then that, you know, you get a certain sensation in your body, and then the thought is that I'm tired or I'm anxious or whatever it may be. And I'm not dismissing any of that. But if you think of any emotion that you feel in the body, or any thoughts that come in your body, everything does pass. Everything passes through, and that's what emotions are designed to do, and that's what thoughts are designed to do. It's when we latch onto them and we obsess about them that whatever you resist, you strengthen. Now, one of the things that, you know, I've certainly found useful where feelings are concerned is actually when you have a feeling in your body, rather than resisting that, is actually just pay attention to it, and you actually notice that feeling. Don't resist it, just observe it as it is. And the interesting thing is, by doing that, what generally happens is the energy in the body will actually dissipate. It will do what it's meant to do. You know, emotion is emotion, energy in motion. And then, you know, the natural progression of that energy will pass, and then you can get on with doing whatever it is that you need to do. So rather than sort of resisting feelings in your body, just observe them, just be aware of them, be with them for a period of time. But just notice, by simply doing that, they tend to move on, they tend to dissipate, and then you can get back onto what it is that you want to do. But I think, you know, summarizing what the question that you asked me is, just realize that when you have certain feelings in your body, those feelings will create thoughts. But there's a great line, I can't remember which book I read it in, you don't always have to believe what you think. And that's a great way of looking at it, that the thoughts that we have, we tend to just take everything that we think as being the gospel truth. But it's not. It's an interpretation of a feeling, it's an interpretation of a situation. And I think the more that you can observe thoughts and feelings rather than being attached to them, you're not then quite so much determined by that. And you can actually, and again, it comes back to movement. When you can get your body moving, it's such a powerful way then to actually not override those things, but actually being able to work with them and get it back on track and doing the actions that you feel that you need to do on any given day.
Yeah, I think that's great, because I think the typical example you'd probably use from our world, Paul, is someone saying like, oh, I'm stressed, I need a glass of wine or something, wouldn't you? And they never even take the time to actually experience the feeling or the emotion or what's caused it, or they're already taking care of it before they've even understood what it is, where it's come from.
That's a really important point. It's a really important point, because what you're doing there is that you've got that feeling of anxiety, that stress, and you're actually resisting that feeling. You're saying, I shouldn't have that feeling. Yeah. And right, I've got to go and get a glass of wine or a bottle of wine to take away that feeling. Well, all that does is that whatever you resist, you strengthen. You know, and as you start to establish that pattern, it actually increases the likelihood of that process continuing in your body. So as you say, to actually just being able to just notice the feeling, sit down and notice it for a while, just be with it, don't resist it. It's not pleasant, but actually always understand that, back to what I said, energy in motion, those feelings in your body, they are energy in your body, and they do want to dissipate. They will go, but they don't go if you resist them. You actually strengthen that. And by doing things like just sort of drinking, if you like, you're dulling that reaction to it. You're dulling that experience.
It's actually the negative the negative in air quotes emotion that people think they shouldn't feel. Yeah. Block it out, numb it, however they deal with it from there, but it's not actually the right thing to do.
Well, there's just a story to highlight that, one I heard years ago, and I think it's a great one. There was a bit too young to remember. There was a famous, really famous. Have you heard of Carly Simon, the singer, famous singer from the 70s? Wrote a lot of great music, but apparently she had really, really debilitating stage fright to such a degree that I think she stopped doing concerts and things like that. And she actually described the feelings that she got in her body before she was about to go out on stage, and she labeled those feelings as being really bad things, and she resisted them and didn't want to have those feelings. And the story goes, apparently, that Bruce Springsteen actually read her description of stage fright. And he said, as he read it, and he said, my goodness, he said, if I don't have those feelings before I go on stage, he said, I can't perform. So he'd had similar quotes, negative, but the way he interpreted it and the way he constructed his story to those feelings was very different. So he was actually able to not resist the feelings, he was actually able to experience the feelings, and then the feelings did what they're naturally designed to do, which was dissipate, and the energy moved on. Whereas Carly Simon had resisted that and avoided it, so every time she resisted it, it strengthened it. strengthened those feelings.
In terms of if we were going to turn this into something that coaches, personal trainers could start to use for themselves, where would they get started with something like this? And then how would they, second part to that would be, how would they then start to help some of their clients with that? Because I think some of the stuff that we're talking about is, I think it's quite complex. I don't know what you think, Matt, but I've not come across a lot of people, and I think it took me a long time to understand that feelings are good. All feelings are welcome. It's all part of how we're made up. It is very much about, how we interpret and give meaning to those feelings that then impacts behavior. How would you, if there's a coach or a PT listening to this now who are just like, I do not know where to start with this, what would be your recommendation for that?
I would say, first of all, I wouldn't necessarily put labels on thoughts and feelings as good or bad, especially feelings. They're just energy in the body. So the first port of call, I would say, with both thoughts and feelings, is just to get better at observation. Just to simply start with that point is to observe the feelings in your body and be okay with the observation of it, and just notice what happens when you just sit there and you notice those feelings. Notice what happens to that experience. Do they intensify? Do they reduce? What is it that happens? And as we understand it, nothing can remain the same when you observe it. So the actual act of observing changes the dynamics of things. So I would literally start at that, a simple principle of just nothing more complex than just simply observing those sensations in your body. And it's the act of observing. We always think we should be changing them. We always think we should be fixing them, and that is the problem. That is the problem. It's not about fixing them. It's allowing them to be there, to observe them, and then to do what they want to do naturally, which is dissipate.
Yeah, which is what circles back to what you started at the very beginning. You observe the player initially just to see what are they doing, how are they feeling, and I guess helping. And is that something you do with your clients and players as well? Do you help them to observe themselves? Is that part of the process? Yeah,
that's a big part of it. Yeah. So one of the things, again, sorry to keep harping back to golf, but it's the thing I spend most of the time talking about. A lot of players will really struggle with their game, not so much with the bad shots, but they'll struggle with the reactions to the bad shots. And the reactions to the bad shots leads to more bad shots and more bad shots. And it can be a very, very expensive thing at the professional level. 2 or 3 shots in a tournament round can be talking hundreds of thousands of pounds. So one of the things, if somebody's poor at that, I'll get them to play a couple of rounds and I'll say to them, I don't want you to change anything, but what I want you to do is to go out there and just simply observe what you do, what your reactions are to poor shots or shots, negative outcomes. Don't do anything. Don't try and change anything. Just observe what actually happens. And it's a really weird paradox, counterintuitive thing. That's the change process underway straight away. Because by simply going out observing what you do, as I said, things you observe what is actually happening, and then you don't stay the same. You actually start to think, well, I can't carry on with this, and you naturally can start to create some alternative responses. If you get somebody and you say, right, you've got to change this and you've got to change that, that's resistance. That's the wrong way of going about it, because the system will resist that, because you're trying to implement a change before they fully experience what actually is. So it's a kind of fix without an overt fix in a way.
Yeah, just so literally just observing themselves, just so that they can see the full picture.
See the full picture. Yeah.
Right.
It's no coincidence that I think it was the Stoics, the ancient Romans. It's no coincidence there's so many books out there now. Ryan Holiday and people like that have talked about what the Stoics said way back in kind of Roman and Greek times. And I think it was Marcus Aurelius that said the number one thing is know thyself. And it's an obvious thing to say, but it was relevant 2,000 years ago, and it's very, very relevant now.
Yeah, a lot of these kind of sayings that are around now, and I like them, but you can retrace them back to things that have been said in the past. and they're still relevant today, and they still work very much so.
Well, if you look at things like, yoga and meditation, things that have been around for thousands and thousands of years, we talk these days of mindfulness as though it's this great new thing. It's stood the test of time. It's been around an awful long time, and I think, when you look at things like that have been around so long, like yoga, like mindfulness, they've stood the test of time for one reason. It's because they work. And I think we can fall into the trap, again, back to the theme that we've had, we can fall into the complexity trap. We think something needs to be complex to actually understand it and fix it. And in many ways, there are some really simple solutions to a lot of the things that we get stuck with. It might sound oversimplistic to a golfer to say, go and observe yourself for 18 holes, the way that you react to shots. But I promise you, anybody who did that, they would become a better player, because they see the way that they truly are rather than the way they think they are. And then the brain starts to provide alternative responses to that.
Yeah. I'm interested to know as well, Karl, we've talked about this observation of like thoughts and like feelings, emotions, and potentially just letting them be and observing them and sort of accepting them. How does that differ in relation to something like, I apologize for giving it a label, but negative self-talk? Like, is that to me sounds like something you should be trying to change, as opposed to these other things where you just let them be. I'm trying to think about when I play football every Saturday, and if I miss a shot, it's easy for me to get frustrated, and throw my arms in the air or whatever. And I try and tell myself next time, like the next one's the one, that's the one that's going in. And I do try and do that on purpose, try and say it out loud. And I'm just wondering how that is self-talk any different from emotions and feelings? Should you treat it differently? What are your thoughts, or what sort of input do you have on that with people?
Yeah, I think it's all part of a kind of large puzzle, really. And you look at self-talk. I think the danger with trying to suppress or change self-talk is that the more you sort of tell yourself, I shouldn't think negatively, I shouldn't say negative things. It's kind of like, don't think negative, don't think negative, don't think negative, and it's just more thinking.
Yeah.
And basically, what I'm getting at is that, Matt, is that when you play anything well, it's usually, if you ask most athletes, describe the best football match that they've ever played, or the best innings at cricket, or the best round of golf, it's very rare that you'll hear anybody say, I was really on me thinking that day, and I kept drowning out my negative thoughts with a lot of positive thoughts. You get the opposite of that. People will describe the best experiences as being calm, as being quiet, as being peaceful. They're absorbed in the game. So I think, in answer to your question, my view is that when you actually understand that positive and negative self-talk is just stuff going through your head, it's just conversation. If you don't pay much attention to either of it, it allows you to actually focus on the game.
Yeah, it's just another distraction.
It's just another distraction. That ultimately, back to attention again, what do you want to be paying attention to when you play football? You want to be paying attention to the ball. You want to be paying attention to the game. You don't want to be paying too much attention to the negative thoughts in your head and trying to replace them with positive ones.
Yeah.
Because I guess positive self-talk has an effect in that sense. If you go, I'm playing really well, and you make a mistake, you kind of not paying attention to the game anymore. Yeah.
You're not. No, that's we assume that positive thinking is better than negative thinking, but actually it's just more thinking.
Yeah.
And all you're doing is revving your brain up. You're just creating more thought. When if your attention is on the environment that you're in, the football pitch, the match, the ball, wherever it is. I've worked with quite a few Premiership goalkeepers over the years, and a lot of the thing with goalkeeping is very similar to golf, in the sense that there's a lot of time that you're not actually playing the game. And a goalkeeper, it's really interesting. A goalkeeper can do lots of great things in a game, and almost nobody pays attention to that, but they make one mistake, and it's obviously, if it results in a goal, that can be a real problem then, because they're in their head, if they're not careful, constantly replaying that negative, that drop cross or whatever it is, and then trying to make up for that. They're trying to say positive things to themselves. But again, what that is doing is taking them away from the game.
Yeah,
they're taking them away from what the next actual movement of the game is. So it's that's the overall thing. I'm not a big fan of trying to alter your self-talk as such. I'm a big fan of understanding it's just stuff that's going through your head, good, bad, and indifferent. And the more that you're able to just let it be and bring your attention back to what you think is important, which is the next play, the next shot, the next conversation, whatever it is, I think that's a more productive route.
That's great. My son's a goalkeeper, so I'm going to think about that and how I can help him. Because you're dead right, describing goalkeepers, this, he's stood there for so long, and you can see the attention just going everywhere but on the game sometimes. Yeah. In
a nutshell, with all of those things, that what is it that our attention tends to go to? It either goes to something that's happened in the past that's never going to come back, or it goes ahead, it projects forward to think something that's going to happen in the future, that you're going to make a mistake again. And it comes back to, this is where the practice of feeling your feet as you're walking along, as you go for a daily walk, for instance, with a goalkeeper, that could be a useful thing, because when they're not playing, if in effect, when the ball is at the other end of the pitch, they can either be in their head regretting the cross that they dropped, or they could perhaps be walking around their box, focused on the feeling of the feet on the ground. And if they're doing that, they're actually present to their experience. Now, that is the best place to then react to the next bit of play that comes their way.
Yeah, makes total sense. He's actually had himself distracted once with a wonderful save he made, and then he was thinking about that for 3 or 4 minutes and forgot the game was going on. Yeah.
So that reinforces, it's the positive, negative stuff. It's kind of like, it just
doesn't matter almost.
It doesn't matter. It's just more thinking that you actually don't need.
What something's just popped into my head there. You've been around the kind of psychology game for a long time now, working in all areas now, because you work with a lot of general population golfers now as well, and elite athletes and everybody. What's kind of, it's more coming to the PT industry, I would say relatively recently, that there's a lot more focus on help people with the mind side of things, rather than just focusing on getting them to lift weights and getting them to run. Yeah. What's next for psychology and working with sports people and general population? Do you think it's going to just continue to grow, or is there any trends coming up in that area?
Yeah, I think probably the next frontier will be more from a neuroscience perspective, where there's people now who've got ways and means of tracking brain activity. Again, to reinforce what we've just talked about. There's a number of people now who talk about the brainwave activity, that at the lower frequencies, at alpha and theta, when the brain is quieter and calmer, that's when you perform. When you're in the zone, that's when you perform at your best. So there's a reduction of the actual amount of thinking that's going on. When you're in the beta wave, when you're in that active brain, when there's lots of thoughts going through your head, that's when you tend to struggle with the game. And I think what we'll get is more and more ability to be able to monitor that. Certainly with a lot of golfers now, they've got gadgets that they can put on, and they can see when the brain is getting too active and there's too much conscious thinking going on. So I think we're probably only at the tip of a very big iceberg. We've been able to dissect the body for a few hundred years now, haven't we? We've been able to map the positions of all the organs in the body, but fortunately or unfortunately, we can't cut the brain open, when it's actually in a human being, and isolate it and look at all of the parts. We're understanding more about it now, but I think an understanding of the hardware of the brain will be the next frontier. I think we're still very much at the beginning stages of that.
Really interesting. And I guess another question related to that, I know PTs, coaches listening to this will be interested in, because when PTs enter the industry, I don't know what you think of this, Matt, but a lot of their goals are to work with professional sports people.
Yep.
Would you agree with that, Matt?
Yep. That was mine.
Yours, right? Yeah. They all talk about, I'll be a PT and then I'll work with a professional sports team, or I'll work with a professional sports person. You've kind of done all that spectrum. Is there a difference, or is it just working with humans? What's the...
It's kind of like, be careful what you wish for as well. Yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, certainly you see it in coaching. Everybody wants to work with tour players, and yeah, that can be a great experience, but it's not all it's cracked up to be. There's some challenges with working in professional. But I think ultimately it does come back to, you're only going to be good as a PT, you're only going to be good as a coach if you get really good at communicating with the person in front of you, that unique human being. I've worked in a couple of sort of team environments over the years, in rugby league and football, and what's my summary of really good teams? My summary of a good team is actually a collection of individuals who are really clear on their role within that team. And when they get really clear on that role within their team, the team then tends to work cohesively, so that, again, back to attention, when I'm going out onto the pitch, I'm really concerned with what my job is, and I get my job done. I'm not concerned and worried about what everybody else is doing. And I think when teams are dysfunctional, the individuals within those teams are not bringing their attention to their role. Their attention is far more on what everybody else is or isn't or not doing. So I think that's what great managers do. And I think you look at, as tough as it is for me to say it at the moment, I think you look at Guardiola and you look at Klopp, and they strike me as being really, really good at being able to speak to individuals within that team. I get a sense that their communication and their man management is just phenomenal. So the idea that you can just stand in front of a group and just blurt out a load of information and think that everybody's going to take that information in the same way. One of the golfers that I work with, Ryan Fox, his father was an All Black, Grant Fox, and he talked about the great coaches that he played under in the All Blacks. He said really the great coaches said very, very little on match day. They were not up there at the front of the room saying, "Oh, you've got to do this and you've got to do that," and throwing lots of tactics at them. He said what they were really, really good at was the days leading up to the matches, whereby individuals would be worked with, and the individuals were crystal clear on what their role was. So, he said the best team talks were the ones where basically they'd almost just say, right, just go and do what you need to do. I trust you, get out there and actually perform on the pitch. Yeah, there was some structures, there was some ideas, courses, but, again, I think I see it a lot in football now. You see some teams, not mention any in particular, but you see some teams that just seem to be so much in their heads thinking about how to play rather than playing. They've got so much technical theory in their head that they're actually not allowed the creativity to come out on the pitch.
Yeah. You can see that, in clear examples in sport, can't you? When you can just see the person's watching someone come up for a penalty on a penalty shootout, and the amount of times you look at it and go, he's going to miss, because you can just see their thinking in their own heads. But so communication is critical, whatever kind of coach you're going to be, whether it's sports people, teams as well. I hadn't thought of that. We had obviously a very, very large team of personal trainers, but the guys at the very top and people like myself and Matt, it was all about communication. It was all about helping people get the best out of themselves and know their role. And exactly as you've been describing, get out of their own heads a lot of the time. I think the better you get as a coach or a trainer is that there's a direct correlation, I think, between how much you say and how effective you are.
if I think back to the first few years of coaching, I should ring everybody up who I ever gave lessons to and give them the money back, because it was just an exercise in me showing everybody how smart I was and how much knowledge I'd got. And I just used to throw all the SH1T at the wall, and hopefully some of it would stick. I look back now on some of the best sessions that I've had in the last maybe 10 or 15 years. And almost every time I can pinpoint it is that I've actually said very little. I've listened a lot, but I've said very little. But maybe the one or two things that I've said, I've actually had some impact, and the players have gone away and worked on that. And it's helped quieten the thinking down, not rev the thinking up. I think there's a broad generalization in terms of performance. Is if your coaching is revving thinking up and getting people to think more, that's poor coaching. If you're allowing people for their thinking to settle and to quieten down, that's when the genius of the body can emerge. And that to me is good coaching.
Love it. I think that's a great place to finish. I don't know about you, Matt.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like a great little way to tie everything up, doesn't it? And bring it down to something very simple.
Which is, reading your background and listening to a lot of your podcast episodes, I think that's one thing that stood out, that you are clearly highly skilled in simplifying the complicated and helping people to get the best out of themselves in that way. So, Karl, thank you for today. I mean, I'm going to go.
I've enjoyed it.
And observe myself for a month, I think, and see where my attention goes at the minute, and probably do a bit of a check-in on a few things just off the back of this conversation. So I've got
seriously, Paul, that's just something that we could all just, you could spend some, given days or times just doing nothing other than just observe yourself as you currently are. Don't try and fix anything. Don't try and change anything. Just observe what's actually going on, and I promise you that makes a difference.
Well, I'm definitely going to go and do that for myself. So thank you for your time. It's been fantastic. I know everybody will have taken a lot of value from it, and hopefully we'll have you back on again at some point in the future.
No, I look forward to it.
If just before you go, Karl, if people want to find out more about you, where's the best place for them to go and find you and what you do, and maybe mention any particular resources that you think might be useful for our kind of audience?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Yeah, I mean, the podcast that you mentioned, my podcast comes out every Friday. It's called The Brain Booster. It's primarily, I suppose, directed towards golf, but there's a lot of guests on there who are not golfers. We've had lots of trainers and other people involved in the sort of mind element of performance. We had a lady on a couple of weeks ago talking about pain control, things like that. So the Brain Booster, and then the website is the mindfactor.com, where actually a number of PTs over the years, I actually do a certification course every year. We only do it once a year in Manchester, and there's a number of PTs have done that course. Because we talk a lot about on the 3 days about how you understand a person's story, and then
specific ways that you can get somebody to change the story, and they found that really relevant to then be able to cross back over into personal training. Brilliant. And yeah, I would highly recommend that podcast. I've been listening for a good few weeks now, and in anticipation of you coming on, I've really enjoyed it. And I need to send a big thank you to Nat Law for recommending to have you on. She's a mutual friend of ours, and yes. Yeah, it's been great today. No, really enjoyed it. Thanks, fellas.
Cheers, Karl.
Cheers, now. All the best.
Hello again. Welcome back to the ProFit podcast. Good to have you with us again for another week. I'm your host, Paul Campy, and my co-host, Matt Robinson, is with us. How are you doing?
Very good. Thank you, Paul. Yourself?
I'm good, mate. Yeah. Apart from some slight technological issues this week, it's been an awesome episode, and we've had another guest this week. We've had a performance mind coach of a very high level. Somebody who's introduced to me by a colleague, a guy called Karl Morris, who has coached world #1 golfers, major winning golfers, lots of other high level sports people, as well as general population, with a really fun, engaging episode, and a real expert in simplifying the complicated. And it's something that I definitely took out of today. What about you, Matt?
Yeah, there was lots of, obviously very, very clear that Karl knows the technicalities of human thought and how the brain works and stuff like that, but just distilled in very, very simple things that you can apply and use day to day. So yeah, if you listen today, you should be able to come away with plenty of things to go away and do.
Yeah, so there'll be things for coaches on here to help yourselves, because being coaches ourselves, we know how hard it is to keep your own attention in the right place, but definitely things that you can help clients with as well. So sit back, enjoy, plenty of learning in this next episode. And here is Karl Morris.